The time is 6:01. I'd like to call this special meeting to order. Okay, for clarification, Dirk, are we gonna do the remote attendance before or after roll call?
Right now.
Sam, do you?
Sure, yes, Your Honor. I would like to make a motion to approve the remote electronic attendance of Second Ward Alderman David Parker, Third Ward Alderman Mike Wendt, Fourth Ward Alderman Dick Potter, Sixth Ward Alderman Kevin Schoonmaker, Seventh Ward Alderman Mike Waldron, Alderman at Large Sonia Berg at the council meeting of April 28th, 2020.
Second.
We have a motion by Alderman Moyer, a second by Alderman Williams. Roll call, please.
Alderman
Oh, I'm
Williams?
sorry, is it roll? Yeah, it is roll call.
Yes,
Sorry,
it
for
is.
Special meeting, roll call.
I'll get over here, sorry. Alderman Williams?
Present.
Parker?
Present.
Wendt?
Present.
Potter?
Present.
Moyer?
Present.
Schoonmaker?
Present.
Waldron?
Present.
Berg?
Present.
Motion,
Oh, we have a quorum. So sorry.
we have a quorum with roll call. We had a motion on the floor though, and we answered with present.
Aye.
Here, we're gonna try this.
I meant aye.
So,
Sorry, I
we
should
did
have probably
roll call, but we're gonna respond to the motion on the floor, please. Janine?
Alderman Williams?
Aye.
Parker?
Aye.
Wendt?
Aye.
Potter?
Aye.
Moyer?
Aye.
Schoonmaker?
Aye.
Waldron?
Aye.
Berg?
Aye.
8 ayes, no nays.
Thank you, motion carries. So we have in remote attendance this evening, Alderman Parker, Alderman Wendt, Alderman Potter, Alderman Schoonmaker, Alderman Waldron, and Alderman Berg. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right, we're gonna begin this evening with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United
Of
States,
the United States of America and to the republic
for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. There will be no invocation this evening. I'd like to open it up for public comment. Is there any public comment this evening?
No.
We had no submissions. Are there any questions on the agenda? We'll begin with the consent agenda. Janine, do we have any items for the consent agenda?
I'm sorry. Your Honor, I request approval of Committee of the Whole and Committee of the Whole minutes of April 14th, 2020 as revised, and Committee of the Whole and Council meeting minutes of April 21st, 2020.
Motion to approve the consent agenda, Parker.
Second.
We have a motion by Alderman Parker, a second by Alderman Moyer. Roll call, please.
Alderman Williams?
Aye.
Parker?
Aye.
Wendt?
Aye.
Potter?
Aye.
Moyer?
Aye.
Schoonmaker?
Aye.
Waldron?
Aye.
Berg?
Aye.
8 ayes, no nays.
That motion carries. Thank you, Janine.
Thank you.
The items on the non-consent agenda, the first item is COVID-19 update. JD, are you leading that discussion?
Yeah, seems that I think the microphone works better when I come up here. I think they.
No, let's try it. Council that's remote, are you able to hear better when JD is at the podium? Or would you prefer him to stay at a microphone that is at one of the council seats?
Can you try the podium? Let's see if it works tonight.
Just give him a test, 1, 2, 3.
And the majority of talking will probably come from Carol, but when I have to jump in, I'll speak about this volume if you guys can hear me okay.
You sound good to me.
Okay.
Okay.
Got good feedback.
So, last week, the council asked about having a special meeting tonight, just because The feeling was, I think, that the situation is moving so fast that they wanted to not skip a week for an update. And so staff's been working on, I know I sent you out an email earlier and let you know some of the things that we're working on and some of the conversations that we want to have both tonight here in the open session, and then I'm going to ask for an executive session to have some discussions. Margaret's joined us tonight. I think Allison's on here with us. And Your Honor, I know you had a request for Carol yesterday to take a look at some of those anticipated revenue projections and that, and she and I talked this morning, and we made that a priority. So she immersed herself in that today, got that priority done for you. She canceled her meetings with the auditors. And so the first slide that we're going to jump to tonight is her walking through that with those new amounts and that, and then she can kind of visit and update you guys on where this has changed from last week and that, and some of those different assumptions that have changed. Go ahead, Carol. I can't see you now, but I know I saw you there earlier.
Okay, yes, I think I am here. If you can, I'll sit up a little closer. And good evening, your mayor and council. The very first slide here is just an update on the revenue sheet, the one that we saw last week. And there's a couple of changes. The number one is on the utility taxes under scenario 2. You will see an amount of the projected loss at 409. And last week we were showing it at 341. And the mayor spent some serious time looking back on the utilities, and she did some recalculations and looked at our projections, and Keith looked at them also, and we agree based on what she said that it should be a tiny, it's about a little bit less than $100,000 change. And so that amount went from an 11% reduction in projected revenue down to a 14% reduction in that line item.
Carol, before you move from that line item, can I ask something about that? So, and just explain,
Absolutely.
Council, what I had was the actual payments in the first 4 months of this year and comparing them to the first 4 months of last year, and then considering that our budget had actually intended for more revenue than last year to come in. We were off 17% in the first 4 months. So does that make sense? And that's just comparing last year to this year. But the assumption that 14% made was that everything is going to be good to go. We won't continue to see a depreciated revenue, and it'll pop back up to what we had budgeted, which was actually an inflation of nearly 10%, Carol, would you say? Because I think it went from something like 2.7 million to 3 million in the budget.
Yeah, I mean that's roughly in the ballpark.
So it makes me a little anxious. I know it's not a huge player in this, but just understanding how we're doing our projections, that we think even if we're going to stay home for additional time and it's going to be a slow turnaround, that would hold. That assumption says that everything is back to what we had hoped for the last 8 months of the year, even though we're off more than 17% so far this year.
Yeah, and with all these revenues, I mean, going forward, we are all finding our way through this.
Uh-huh.
So if anybody looks at anything that appears to be odd, you know, I appreciate another second pair of eyes as Keith and I try to continue to update this.
I guess
And I'm trying to think, there wasn't any other big changes on that sheet.
uh-huh.
We're hoping now towards the very first week of May, we tend to get some of the monthly revenues that will come in. And as soon as we get those, then we will update, you know, all the categories that are paid out within a 30-day period. So you'll probably see all the numbers flux a little tiny bit here after we get some May revenues coming in, from April.
Carol, I think my question is, why is that particular line unique? Why do we expect that to rebound no matter what the circumstances, when we're acknowledging just below that we're going to have more of a decrease in our utility funds? I would assume that would be the same case for electricity and power. If they're not paying their water, they're not paying their electricity and power, and that would directly impact that tax revenue as well. I'm just curious what the finance department's philosophy is on that we feel like that's gonna hold.
No, that's exactly right. And the part of it is, like Keith keeps saying, the hardest thing on those revenues, if we actually look back, I think it was to 18 or the year before, the numbers were quite high. And it depends on, like, if we have a very warm summer or a very cold winter, you know, people might be spending, you know, more electricity or gas on heat. And so that kind of fluxes. And of course, it does change if there are buildings, some of our larger buildings that are not up and running.
So there was one more issue with that, and I'm sure our records reflected, but there were properties that were included in that utility tax revenue stream that should not have been, and so they were pulled off. And that correction was made last year, but I don't know how it was reflected the previous year. So the airport point was on.
I'd have to ask Keith about that. That was before my time.
Yeah.
But that would definitely have an impact if that is so. I'll make a note to myself on that one. But that makes total sense.
It just, I suspect it's not gonna pop back up. I suspect that we had the budget line arbitrarily, or not arbitrarily, but maybe inaccurately inflated for this year. I don't think it's gonna recover.
And he kind of does a rolling average. He's actually got 4 or 5 years worth of history that he rolls his averages to. So it's again, another set of eyes looking at it with a different perspective. When Keith looked at it today and he thought, well, you know, if that's what the mayor is thinking also, and it's kind of a little bit of a vulnerable revenue stream, we decided to be more conservative and we reduced it. So I appreciate you taking the time to look at that, Your Honor.
Okay, sorry to interrupt. Carol, go ahead.
Oh, no, not at all. Not at all.
Your Honor.
Yes, Mike, Alderman Nguyen.
I had one other quick question on here. Down under the other minor revenues, we have it now where it actually seems to, under the $10 million scenario, actually going up from what we had originally projected. But last week it showed a $1.955 million reduction.
Yes, and you're exactly.
Yeah, what was the difference?
You're exactly right, Mike. When we talked about that last week, I went back and I talked to Keith, and it was the way he was picking up transfers between internal service funds. So we have netted everything back to be equal to the 5.8, and I really apologize for that gross up on that. And when we, hopefully tomorrow, starting tomorrow on our 2-on-2s, we are hoping to have fund equity statements on this new scenario to provide you, and then you'll see where all the numbers will tie out. So it's not so terribly confusing. So I apologize in that last week that was a big number. So these numbers right here, the 5 point. Excuse me.
Oh, I just said thank you. I just saw that big difference and didn't know what it was. No, that's exactly right. Good catch on that, and we'll work that through as well on the 2-on-2 this week. Does anyone else have a question on the major revenues?
On that particular line, Carol, I have a question. So it's a little bit like the utility tax funds. I'm just wondering about your philosophy on why we would expect it to be less impactful if we have additional stay-at-home and a slower recovery. It looks like it goes from impacting -1% to not impacting. It goes to 0% in the more conservative scenario.
It actually goes up.
Well, I know
it actually goes up, and
I think that
we went back to all the departments across all the funds and had them tweak their revenues and relook at all their projections. And all I can say is, in the middle of going through it all, those are the changes that occurred.
Okay.
I can try to run it down on what some of the big ones were, there wasn't really a philosophy. It was just, like I say, it's a change. When we did that one probably a month ago now, the 5.8, I think departments probably have some better information on the individual funds.
Thank you.
Any other questions on that one?
Alderman Potter?
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, Carol, just so I'm clear here, these are all just projections because up till now, all we have is the data through March, correct?
That's correct. And I'm hoping here on the 2-on-2s, Keith actually has a 12-month spreadsheet where he's kind of showed January through March what's coming in, and then you'll see some dips coming in the summer months and then rising to the top to tie out with his numbers. But yes, they're all projections.
Thank you.
Okay. So Carol, we can go ahead and jump to the next slide, but as you've been here, the question that we had asked Randy for, let me tell you, she's over there being our warrior. Alderman Went, you had asked for some reserve levels in facilities. It's $1,449,000. In fleet, it's $3,429,000. And in
JD, where is this at?
Oh, you had asked that question just a few minutes before when we were still, when Carol was over there. I think you had asked that of Carol and I, and Randy's over there. She must be over there in Carol's office, and she just sent that to me.
What was the question? Can you frame it up?
He asked what the reserve levels were in those three internal service funds. Fleet, facilities, and liabilities. So Randy must have gotten that before she left. So fleet was $3,429,000, and then liability is $5,167,000. So the total between those three is $10,045,000.
But I guess my question was, what is the appropriate level of those reserves? I mean, we've been like liability is a great example, and I think it's going to impact a number of our discussions here coming up.
Yep.
Is that liability amount the appropriate amount, or do we have excess funds in it, which would I think affect some of the other decisions we may make later, or are we thin on that reserve, which again would I think affect some of our decisions. So I think that's the more important question is, what is the appropriate amount versus what we actually have?
Yeah, and I think, Carol, go ahead.
And I want to go into that a little bit more on our 2-on-2s this week. We've talked about pulling down the fleet and the facility operating budgets, and we're actually going to pull them down probably a little bit farther than maybe what I would normally say to keep it. But I'm going to walk you through all of those. On the liability, we have a little more excess cash as well, but at this point, just based on some employment issues that we're going to be talking about here in the future, we thought we may want to try to keep a little bit higher amount in the liability for now. But once council makes some decisions going forward, that could be another fund that we take a look at to draw down, depending on what council decides to do with personnel. So we've got some flexibility with that. We've also got over $6 million in the different health insurance funds, the active health and the regular health reserve. So there's about $16 million total there at 12/31 with the audit.
Okay. So do you want to start down through this then, and then
sure. And if we can just kind of work off each other, JD. I'm sorry I'm not there, that we can kind of look at each other going back and forth.
Yeah.
But just starting at the top again, this is the same kind of what we did. I might have put it in a little different format this week. The good news is we're continuing to work through the audit, and it looks like this amount of net reserves, $957,000, will be a good amount. That will be an excess amount in the general fund. And based on the expenditures total expenditures less the advances. That is one thing that kind of changed that fund, is we had a change in the advances for the TIF here, as we're still trying to finalize the audit this week. The net balance as a percentage of expenditures now is 27%, or roughly 97 days. So it's a very strong amount. Yes, Alderman Witt?
So a couple of questions. The excess reserves, what reserves are they? Can we get the breakdown of what reserves those are being taken out of?
Okay, oh, I'm sorry. This is just the general fund. This is just the general fund. This is the net to the good. So the general fund came under budget last year, $957,000.
So this is an excess. This is just money we budgeted last year and didn't spend.
Yes, I mean, you can look at it that way, but it's an excess added to the previous fund balance.
Right, but when you use excess, it's like, hey, we have too much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I can appreciate that.
So the other question, to calculate the 97 days, because I think we've gotten, over the last 3 weeks, the number of days in reserve has been a moving target. And my guess is, and I want to just make sure that I understand this, it's because you're taking it as a percentage of this continuously decreasing budget, correct?
Yes, that makes a difference. If the expenditures go down, that will make the percentage go up. And we also had a reduction in advances that got paid to the TIFs from what was budgeted. And so that coupled together increased the dollar amount.
Well, so my concern is, this year we're having these cuts that we're going to be down $10 million because of revenue and those sorts of things. So this year's budget is going to be a normal budget less 10 million, which is, I don't know, around 15% of our revenues or something like that. So if we use your calculation of doing it this way, on December 31st, while we're in this budget year, we'd have 97 days of reserves. But if we passed in 2021, assuming we went back to normal and it was the same budget as 2020, 15% higher, on January 1st, the number of days in our reserve would plummet, because the number you're dividing it by just went up to our normal budget amount, right?
Yeah. No, I understand what you're saying. Yes, I mean that all plays into the calculation. Yeah.
So what would I think when we're talking about our reserves, unless we're planning on next year running a budget that's $10 million light, just like this year's budget, I don't think that it's appropriate to be calculating our reserves based on this this budget this year, which is, I think, absolutely an outlier, unless I'm wrong and the other aldermen want to next year for our budget to be 15% light. I think it's appropriate when we're talking about reserves so that it doesn't change on January 1st and our days plummet. I'd like to see that number based on what our expected normal budget amount would be.
Okay. And I can certainly try to calculate that for the 2-on-2s to kind of give you a feel for that. And I haven't gotten to the bottom of the page, but if you look at the third line from the bottom, for 19, the expenditures were $43.8 million, and for 12/31/20, and that's if we kind of net everything back out, we're at 42,906. But the original budget had been almost $45 million. So I understand your point. So I will try to help work through that for the 2-on-2s. I'll try to get a way to try to present that.
That'd be great. I appreciate that.
Okay, all right. So going down this page, again, that very top, it's the same that we talked about before. There's about $957,000 of budget to actual money that came in at the end of the year. And in the general fund revenue shortfall, it's roughly the same as what it was last week. The difference came is on our next line on operating cuts, and JD's going to help me chime in here, but that number jumped from about 1.9 up to the 2.6. And there's a combination of a lot of different cuts that were made during this last week, including there was a couple of additional positions of people that announced their retirements. So we have additional hiring freeze positions that we're adding to our amount. One thing, when we took a little closer look at the budget, that was a big pop. As you know, the Quad City Visitors Bureau, they get a percentage of our overall hotel motel tax. And we've been working so fast and furious here the last couple of weeks. We reduced the revenue for hotel motel, but we had not reduced the expenditure to the Quad City Visitors Bureau, and that was about $130,000. So there were some pops like that kind of brought that up to the $2.6 million now in cuts. And again, when we look at the fund equities, you can see it, and hopefully through some of those summary sheets, we're going to maybe try to revise that a little bit, but you'll be able to see what some of those big numbers are.
Yep. So,
we did follow, go ahead.
I was just going to say some of the other ones after municipal services completed the council bill here with the anticipated salt purchase. We went back and adjusted their operating supplies budget to incorporate that contract and what we know we're going to be obligated to do. And I think that saved another $44,000 there and some different, and that's just an example of some of the different things that staff continues to go through and look at. So I anticipate before we, get finished with all these meetings and updates and bring a recommended proposed adjusted amended budget to you, that number could change again.
Yep.
Go ahead, Carol.
But some of the numbers I think you'll see stay almost where they were. We did go ahead and transfer the engineering salaries and benefits from the Public Works budget, a portion thereof, into the utility funds to pay for capital projects, work in the capital projects. You'll also see here the reduced transfer out of the library. I know the library board took action this last week regarding that issue, but there's $114,000. And then the park board as well. There was a meeting talking about money to be transferred back over to the general fund if there was savings to be had from reducing some of their seasonal help and some programming through July 1st. That totals up to $567,000. That's a little higher. I think we projected about $410 last week. And then we've got the transfer from the fleet, and I heard from the discussion last week, we kind of backed away from our original thought press with enterprise funds, but I want to work through you this week on the 2-on-2s. I am recommending that we do have ample reserves to reduce the fleet fund balance. It'll just be one time for $750,000, as well as the facility fund for $550,000. And Sarah has gone through, and we've looked at the vehicle purchase for the next 5 years, as well as all of the improvements on the facilities, and we've got those adequately budgeted and funded going forward for the next 5 years.
Carol?
Carol, this is Alderman Waldron. Would it be possible to, I'm concerned about the facilities. I don't want our facilities to slip and to get worse. We've been in that road before. Could it be possible to send us a listing of how you got to the 550 in facilities?
Yes. Do you want it ahead of the 2-on-2s? We're preparing to give it to you in a packet.
That's fine, as long as I'm able to see how you were able to reduce $500,000.
Okay. Nope, I'm happy to.
Thank you.
As JD said, there's currently just shy of $1.5 million in there. So we'll still have about $900,000 kind of rolling forward.
Carol?
And
Carol, can I ask you?
I'm sorry.
I have a question. This is Stephanie.
Yes?
The reduction in those two funds, and so let's just move beyond Alderman Waldron's concern that they may be too severe. Let's say that they are appropriate and those were excess funds. Are we going to make an adjustment in our next budget season to draw less from the other departments to fund that? If we're inflating those funds at the rate that we're drawing now, that we've got extra, are we gonna make an adjustment moving forward in next year's budget? Does that make sense? Because the facility budget, that fund is financed from all of the departments and their building responsibilities, their square footage, and so it gets calculated and pulled out of that department. But from my perspective, if we have excess funds, that means we were pulling more than we needed out of those other department budgets.
Yep. To be honest, Mayor, what we did is we believe there's excess that can be had, but going forward, we are going to continue to bill at the same amount. So those fund balances may go up a little bit, and we can tweak those as we go.
So that may just.
But in order to fully fund, since we were postponing some of these purchases and to make her cash flow work out, we kept the fees at the same amount. But that's something to look at when we go to adopt next year's budget. You know, we can really dive into that and look at that a little bit closer.
I think Alderman Went has a question.
Yeah, I guess along that same vein, if these truly are excess, then it's kind of like having an escrow account. If it's taking in too much money, then we need to reduce what's being put into it. And so I think when we sit down in our 2-on-2s, I think we need to be prepared for you guys to say, yes, next year it's going to be reduced by 7% the overall because we are accumulating too much cash in these accounts if it's truly excess. If it's not, and because my fear is we're saying that it's excess just to balance the budget this year, and then we're going to put ourselves behind the 8 ball in future years trying to catch up because we've deferred maintenance, deferred purchases, and then, oh my goodness, it's going to have to go up 30% to all departments to catch up.
No, those very.
We've all been in that situation where the escrow, they didn't take enough out, and then they send you a bill, say, "Hey, we need an extra $1,500," and you're not prepared for it. And so we really need to make sure we lock that down.
Okay, no, and your thoughts are very, very well taken. And I guess my best response is it's kind of a combination of both. I think there was some additional money that we could take, but some of it we did kind of stretch some of the life of the vehicles out. Sarah spent a lot of time looking at, the actual vehicles in the fleet, and if we could get another year out of their life, she really spent a lot of time looking forward. But I'll be anxious for you guys to look at that 5-year plan. But there's still a lot of vehicles that are being replaced, so I'll be happy to share that with you this week.
Yeah.
And we'll put our heads together to make sure that we're all feeling comfortable on that, on the fund balances.
Yeah, and we'll be...
I don't want to jeopardize the integrity of those funds because I know it took a lot of years to work up to it, and they've been working very well.
Yeah, and the example in facilities, and I know Alderman Waldron, we've talked about the roof at the library, and that was one of the ones that we were nervous about because the year after the library was built, that technology and that roof design was no longer used in any commercial construction. So we've had that on our radar for a long time, but Sarah was encouraged that part of the reason we can have this reduction in Alderman Nguyen, I think this is should give you a comfort level that ongoing we're staying tuned into this stuff, is that this new technology that they used on the roof in Public Works held up good through the winter, and it had a cost savings involved in it when we did it last year. So I think we're comfortable looking at that design. And I think, Sarah, maybe next week, I know, Dirk, you're looking at a contract for her, and if she's got that ready, it may be coming next week for the partner.
The design contract, yeah.
Yep. And so we may have that for you so we can get started talking about that roof on the library, maybe as early as next week.
Any other questions on the first half of the page? And if not, the second half is just kind of a recap, and I'm going to go through it again in detail with our fund equities on our 2-on-2s. But the very first column there for 12/31 of 19, this is again preliminary audit. We're going to complete the field work hopefully by the end of this week. But tentatively, the beginning balance there in that column, the 22,898, that is the audited fund balance from 18. Then we've talked about the additional revenues over expenditures that we anticipate to end the year, the 957. Brings down a projected, I should have put projected on there, ending fund balance at 12/31 of 19. I didn't label this very well.
Yeah.
Of 23,856,000, and then from that, you subtract out your advances, and you've got your net fund balance that is available at 11.8. And that fund balance as a percentage of total annual expenditures, and again, these are preliminary audited numbers, 43,008,000, leaves a net fund balance as a percentage of expenditures at 27% in 97 days. As we move forward into the next column for the 12/31 of 20, this is based on the COVID $10 million scenario. And again, it's the ending fund balance carried forward, the gross amount, not less the advances, the gross amount carried forward. There have been some discussions today about looking at additional drawdowns, but the one I want to talk about is the 2019 excess reserves. We talked about this last week. 204,000 we've already committed for in the current budget that we were hoping we were going to have excess reserves for the 204. Again, I'm totaling this up for the 957. Then to that, we had 374. That is a commitment. It's an audit adjustment for the P25 radios for 374,000. And then in the previous sheet that we had shown you last week, we were hopeful that the council would consider using the additional remaining reserves of the 378,000 to help balance the COVID-19. So we're showing there that we are going to put towards the entire amount of the 2019 additional reserves. So we've got an ending fund balance of 21,908, ending cash reserves at 11,7. Oh, I'm sorry, less cash advances of 11,7, and you'll see that cash advance to the TIPS is down ever so slightly, and that also plays into the formula. But that was also a budgeted amount for 2020. And then that leaves us the net fund balance. If we draw down 957,000 and potentially even more of a million, would bring our net fund balance down to 10,152,000. And then the 10,152,000 over the net annual expenditures, we still have $541,000 to find. As we showed up above in the blue box, we're currently short $1.5 million. So if we were to draw down reserves of $1 million, we'd still have $541,000 we've got to find. If we find that amount, the net expenditures would be the $42.9 million, and it would leave a ending fund balance percentage of total expenditures of 23.66% with 85 days.
Alderman Nguyen?
Can you, just so everybody's on the same page, and this kind of gets back to the discussion we were having earlier. I mean, 2 weeks ago, we had a presentation that we had 89 days, and that if we took $2.2 million out, we'd be down to 72 days. I know there's lots of different variables that go into this, but I feel like the cheese is moving on us a little bit as we talk about these days of expenditures. And so I'm assuming this has got the same issue as the 97 days above. This is on the assumption of only this outline budget year in which we are way below what next year is going to be. So if we get down to that level on January 1st, the number of days would wind up plummeting if we had a budget that was a normal budget.
Yeah. No,
Okay.
your point is well taken. What I'll do for our 2-on-2s, Mike, I'll go back to our original adopted budget of 45 million and calculate what that percentage would be. If that would be helpful with that drawdown on the fund balance.
I think that allows us to talk apples to apples rather than this kind of outlying year.
Alderman Waldron?
In full disclosure, I was one of the ones that requested the million to be drawn down from reserves. And in talking with other aldermen, I understand Alderman Wentz's theory about the budget being different next year. So before I would make a motion or anything to draw down $1 million, I'd like to get through those 2-on-2s to see what the effect would be on those budgets. But in full disclosure, I was the one that requested the $1 million drawdown, partly because I do believe it's a rainy day fund. I do believe these are extraordinary situations, and if we are going to be looking for $1.5 million worth of cuts, it's going to be a severe kick to services. And so at least keep that in mind and keep your opinions open at this point until we get through the 2-on-2s. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Waldron.
Your Honor?
I can't see who that is, but go ahead. Alderman Potter?
Alderman Potter here. Yes, I guess I'm a little less concerned about the argument about percentages, and I'm happier to see the fact that there's ample actual dollars in those funds. An additional $957,000 in excess reserves, however you want to phrase that or whatever, allows us to draw that down. And you know, I'm more than comfortable going to 72 days or even potentially farther in order to balance this budget. I think that, you know, that's what it's there for, is a rainy day fund. And if this isn't a rainy day, I don't know what is.
Thank you, Alderman Potter.
Your Honor, could I speak to one more thing? I know, Carol, you're very humble and you're very modest, but the other reason that 11,853,437 number has changed some also is that she's juggling the audit in the middle of all this, and as they nail down, you know, how much our cash advances are, like she said, that's 22,898,000 is actually what we have in the general fund, but we have a lot of that advanced to the different TIFs. And as the auditors get through and they're giving her, you know, different numbers and refining that's why that number's changed, I think, a little bit from the first time she presented. That's $11 million of unrestricted that was there, I think, in her first presentation on the 7th of April. So that's also part of what's making that change. So.
Your Honor, this is Alderman Waldron.
Yes.
Going back to the transfer in from fleet, the transfer in from facilities, I forgot to ask at the time. Some of those funds are from utilities. Will we be returning those funds back to utilities? Well, not in the facilities, but in fleet. Utilities contributed to the fleet funds. Will we be returning those funds back to the enterprise funds where they belong? And then then when that happens, is the actual number 750,000?
Yeah, we're going to do it like when you and I have done it over the years. It'll be calculated right back, the net impact back to the general fund customers through a reduction in chargebacks, and that will be that 750,000. That's the general fund impact of that, yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any further questions on this sheet?
We wanted to use this opportunity, one more slide, to show you. I think, you know, we were all in an email exchange here a week ago. Don, if you could go to the next one. Carol can talk to the specifics of this. Rod, I saw Rod on the screen also, and I don't know if Rod has Joe Kuhlenbeck with him here, but this is busy. I realize that, but I think moving forward, Carol, Laura, Joe, everyone down in municipal services and engineering, and that put their heart and soul in this. Carol one night, which shame on you, Carol, too, because I got an email from you at like 1 o'clock in the morning, was working on breaking out utility tax and CIP so she could show these two independently in the two columns where they've kind of been presented and displayed before in unison. And the plan is moving forward now as we bring projects forward, all projects that we're going to be hitting any of these different funds. This will be in your agenda packet, and it'll give you a running total and the running impact of all those projects as budgeted and as bid as they come forward. So this is, I think it's going to be a really, really nice tool, Your Honor. So.
Thank you. Are you going to go into this in detail, or are we going to?
No, I just want to show you and kind of give you an example of it. I know Carol's answered some different questions on it and that, and she can probably try tonight, or we can get Laura and Joe, to maybe give a little introduction to it at some point in time and more of the detail. But it's
The 2-on-2s.
And I'm happy to walk through it so briefly, just to get you a little more familiar, because I was hoping to talk about it on the 2-on-2s as well. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
But one thing that I added, as you know, last week when we had our discussions, we were showing that the CIP and utility tax. Excuse me, can everyone hear me?
Did someone say something, or did you intend to be on mute? Someone put us on pause. Okay, thank you.
Okay,
go ahead,
I think we're back. Last week, I know there was a lot of
I'm sorry. I was just going to suggest that, Don, could you force everybody onto mute, please?
I can force mute all.
We're going to mute everybody. If you want off mute, you're going to have to click yourself off mute. Can you give them the control?
They're muted.
All right. Go ahead, Carol.
She can unmute.
Okay, last week,
She got it.
I'm sorry, take 3 or 4. We had kind of a lengthy discussion about the impact on our CIP fund with utilities and the MFT, with concern that some of the projects coming before council were maybe going to be more than the funds could handle. And I had stated last week that I was going to take a look at the reserves and with the audit, and we were able to work through all of those this last week, and I feel confident that the fund balances that are being now reflected on that very first row are good fund balances coming forward. And so you'll see on the CIP, $2.1 million in utilities. It shows it being drawn down about $485. We have always looked at those funds as being joined and together, commingled. We're still kind of sorting it out with the engineers to see if by chance some projects got expensed into the wrong division under utilities that maybe should have come out of the home rule sales tax. So we'll have further updates on that. But the total balance between both of them, we've got good audited or unaudited reserves between the CIP and utility tax fund. And then moving over is on the MFT, we've got almost $1.8 million in that fund for motor fuel tax being able to be, and all these funds are unrestricted. There's no outstanding amount, and I have already netted out some retainage on some projects. So those are good, available, unrestricted fund balances. And so what we have there, and we're going to go through it again in more detail on our 2-on-2s, but the first column of every category, you've got your CIP, utility, water, et cetera. You'll have the original budgeted column, which is the column to the left on each one of them. And then you will have, it's the as-bid column. And if we continue to update this in future years, every time an item comes before the council on the agenda, we're going to show this sheet and then how it's changing or impacting our fund balances. So the bottom line is, if we go to the very bottom, we have tied out all of the budgeted columns cumulative. They tie out with your budget book. I don't know what page number is. Mike might know. It's like 400 and some, I think.
Like 410.
Yep, I knew you'd know. But it ties out perfectly to $14,790,000 worth of projects. If you look at the far right column, the total budget, $14,790,000. And again, that's accumulation across all the funds. And the total as bid for all of those projects is $12,123,000. In addition to that, I have highlighted in blue, we still don't know where we're at for sure, but as you know, Jeff Anderson was working on trying to get a grant here for the bike path. So we've tentatively put that in. Even if we use our match, because we have to match $230,000, we have ample reserves left in the MFT at the end of the year of $645,000 if you follow the as-bid column all the way down to the bottom. In addition, what we did after I talked to the engineers, we decided that it would be very prudent to be adding in, it's the blue column, the second to the last line, they projected a 5% contingency for change orders. So that now, as you know, projects never come perfectly, even if they're bid. You're going to have some change orders. And Laura and Joe had gone back, and if they look over the last few years, that's kind of an average amount that may happen. So that's why we plugged those in. Again, we're not going to spend those monies, but they're available. And so that if they come back with a change order, you'll know that that's already worked into our fund balance. So yeah, the engineers, they work really hard, Laura and Joe, helping put this together, and I think it's going to be a good working tool for all of us. And if there is something else that you'd like to see on this, please let me know, and we'll get it incorporated going forward.
This is very helpful, Carol. Thank you for breaking that out. The as-bid is very important to us right now. Alderman Wendt?
Yeah, thank you. And Carol, I personally wanted to thank you. I know we went back and around on this, and this makes it so much easier. I think this gets to the heart of the conversation we had last week, whether some of those projects we're doing we're going to wind up putting us in the negative. And really, from what I gleaned from our conversation, to put it in layman's terms, is like for CIP and utility tax, the money was in both pockets. And you could spend it out of either one. And over the last 2 years, for whatever reason, we just kept reaching into the right pocket and spending there, and left money in our left pocket. And so this, you can see that down at the bottom, where one's negative and one's $1.3 million in the positive. That we aren't deficit spending on those things. These are. They're earmarked. They have to be spent in the right of way or for capital improvement, and so we can't use them for other things. So I think that it's good that we have this running total, so we don't run into that issue or miscommunication in the future.
Okay.
Carol, I have a question for you. So we had some discussion at our last meeting about revenue anticipation notes, and with the calculations from last week that we've resolved here, that those would be needed. If those would have been needed in our accurate scenario, why weren't they applied in this case? I mean, if we needed a revenue anticipation note projected at that time, why wasn't there a revenue anticipation note issued against these funds that went negative? I'm just trying to understand that concept of how it was presented and what that means to us.
And I'm so sorry, Your Honor, you were cutting out.
Oh, sorry.
I might try to answer what I think you might have been saying. Number one, under this scenario, now that we've carried forward audited fund balance, we do not need any revenue anticipation notes for the current year budget. But I think you might have been addressing the previous year if we were letting it go go to the negative.
Like, for instance, the discussion was presented to us that if in order to execute the projects, we need revenue anticipation notes in anticipation of future revenue in those funds. But I'm looking at our utility tax, and you think that maybe there was some charge that was applied or it was kept on going into that pocket, and Alderman White, you make a good point, except for there wasn't anything in that pocket at one point, but yet it never triggered a revenue anticipation note as what was being presented as an option to us last time. How did that happen, accounting-wise? How did we go negative fund without?
Now I'm understanding. In the past, my understanding is I actually called Kathy, and Scott and Kathy would typically put that spreadsheet was on the cash flow together at the end of the year. And because from an audit perspective, the funds are commingled and they're just shown on a combined number. It just happened that it actually now all occurred in the last year, it looks like. As we brought numbers forward, it was in the current year, as in 2019. And going forward now, if we are seeing if there's a deficit spending, I absolutely will be alerting the mayor and council. And if we need to do some other type of funding, we absolutely will. I am hoping that Joe and Laura were working with Kelly, the administrative assistant, kind of going back and tracking back on those projects through 19 to see if by chance there were projects that just got expensed into the wrong bucket.
Yeah, I could see that happening.
And I will bring that back to you if there are changes.
Thank you, Carol. I appreciate you explaining that to me.
Okay.
Your Honor,
Yes, Alderman
Potter here.
Potter. And then
I'd just like to clarify, I've heard this a number of times that none of these CIP monies, whether they be local option sales tax or utility tax monies, can be used for anything else. The enabling legislation which set these funds up directed certain percentages to go into the general fund and certain percentages to go into the CIP fund. Nothing prohibits this council or any future council from changing that and deciding to spend the money in the general fund or any other way. I'm not advocating for that, but it's easy to change that scenario that was set up by the council when they originally applied the utility tax. That these are not like MFT funds where they have to be spent in certain restricted ways. So I just want people to understand that because, for instance, the hotel motel tax was never part of the general fund until years after it was instituted. And all it takes is a simple council action to reverse those things. Let me be clear, not advocating for it. Just want to make sure that everybody's clear that a future council can decide to do it differently.
Alderman Parker?
So Carol, I'm looking at this spreadsheet and just walk me through what I'm looking at, because at the bottom it says 5% contingency for change orders. For CIP, it's $46,000. What's that 5% of?
My understanding, Laura and Joe came up with that, but it's the actual cost of the project. In the CIP fund, I got to get my glasses on.
It looks like it's more like 9% or so in that, or what would it be, 1%? It's a lot smaller.
Yeah, and the reason why is you'll see
1%.
You'll see right above, kind of towards the bottom there, you'll see lines for debt service, budgeted $3 million, and then the $297.
Okay.
There's no contingency going against those. It's only the projects listed up in the top half of the column.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Yep.
And I would like to say I so apologize with if council and the mayor are feeling like some of our numbers are kind of floating. I feel bad that here the COVID-19 happened to occur right at the same time that we were finalizing the audit with a lot of accruals. And as you know, we were without a director last year for about 8 months. And there was a lot of tying back, even to go back to the 2018 audit and pull things forward. And I mean, things were in good order. They just needed to be put in the right spot. So I appreciate your patience and hopefully your understanding on that a little bit. Going forward, that's the last thing I ever want to do is to have the appearance or the feeling that, we're kind of changing numbers on people. I want it, if the number is what the number is, or there should be a real good exception or a reason for it. So.
Thank you, Carol.
Okay, well, that's all I had, Your Honor. I'm going to ask you to let me finish. I've got some other topics I'd like to talk to you about in executive session. And as I mentioned, I've got Margaret and Allison joining us remotely as well.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So the next item on the agenda is the special service areas 5 and 6 information exchange. Who's going to present that?
I know I was asked to put that on there, and I don't know exactly what the topics were when.
I apologize, JD, I put you as a presenter.
Oh.
Possibly
Okay.
Dirk wanted to make a statement on that?
Do you feel like we need to have this be an item this evening, because we can pull it off the agenda as well? Was that it?
Take it off the agenda, but I.
Okay, all right, we'll discuss it at a later meeting, it's not something we need to talk about tonight. So we didn't have any miscellaneous business, this evening? Do you have a,
I don't.
do you have a?
Your Honor, I'd like to make a motion that the council convene an executive session for the purpose of discussion of pending, probable, or imminent litigation, collective negotiating matters, appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees.
And imminent litigation.
I think you said that, did you not?
11, did you get 11?
Pending, probable, or imminent litigation. First one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good motion, is there a second?
I'll second.
Second.
We have a motion by Alderman Williams and a second by Alderman Moyer. Roll call, please.
Alderman Williams,
Aye.
Parker,
Aye.
Wentz,
Aye.
Potter,
Aye.
Moyer,
Aye.
Schoonmaker,
Aye.
Waldron,
Aye.
Berg.
Aye.
8 ayes, no nays.
That motion carries. I'd like to now convene an executive session. Anyone that's not in the executive group, legislative group, would you please sign on? Just for the formality. We're back in open session. I do not believe we have any additional items on the agenda. Is there any further business? Alderman Waldron. Alderman Waldron. Alderman Waldron.
I would like to make a motion to not necessarily revisit, but go back to terminating people that aren't paying their water bill, water, sewer, sanitation, especially in light of our payment plan where we allow people to contact us and get on as a payment plan. I believe that if we red sticker a door, we're going to hear from these folks that aren't participating at all with us. They're just deciding we've implemented a water turnoff ban and they don't contact us, they're not going to pay anything. And once this is over, they're going to be gone. So I would like to make a motion to continue to shut off water, to force these people to contact us, get on a payment plan, and pay a minimum of at least $25 a quarter. I do not think that's unreasonable.
It may not be unreasonable, but I think it's prohibited by the governor right now.
Yeah, I'm trying to pull it up.
So Dirk's trying to pull it up, but there's a restriction on shutting off utilities right now.
If Dirk can find it, Alderman Waldron, I know it says that he urged the ICC to do that on all the utilities that are underneath their control, and then kind of extended that same urging to all local utilities as well.
Urge doesn't give me anything other than I want another cookie. Is it in fact law or is it an urge?
Dirk needs a minute. He's trying to look it up for you. He's off camera. You can't see, but he's feverishly over there.
Alderman Waldron,
Waldron's not suggesting that we, he said red sticker and arrange a payment plan, which is how we're kind of giving them a free ride.
Do we need a second before we get into discussion?
huh?
Do we need a second before we get into discussion?
Oh, yeah, I mean, we can, I'm just.
Motion, Parker.
Thank you.
I'm just very concerned about us considering a motion that may be in violation of the governor's statute. Could we, or mandate? Here comes
Alderman Schoonmaker's correct. I'm not inferring that we shut any water off. That these folks should be getting a hold of us and starting a payment plan.
All right, so here's my off-the-cuff analysis of this. The governor has not prohibited us from doing it. In fact, the terms of the executive order are even a little different. That local government has to determine what its essential functions are and then how to pursue those essential functions. So on the basis of the essential function language, I'm going to put this back in your laps, that how you deal with your utilities being an essential function is one of your things. The vast majority, as I look at this, of municipalities have gone away from shutoffs, but being given your home rule powers and the language in the order that states individual units of local government can determine how to pursue their essential functions, I would say you have the power to do this.
Any other
And all I
comments?
want to do is get their attention and get them on a payment plan, not necessarily shut off their water.
I'm going to say that whatever we do tonight, you're not going to make it into effect until next Tuesday, because it's not on the agenda, so.
Yeah, it's a special, I don't even think we're allowed to debate it because we don't
We're
have it
not
on the
really- We're not
agenda.
supposed to have any discussion, so we
So-
can bring it back for the next meeting. Special meetings, you're not allowed to even discuss new topics. You're only limited to exactly what's on the agenda.
That's right.
So we can bring it back at the next one with a proposed thing, and,
So I'm going to request someone table the motion because of that provision. We can't debate something like this without it being on the agenda. And it's only because this is a special meeting. If this was a normal meeting, Alderman Waldron, we could, but we have a restriction because it's a weird special meeting. So can somebody please give me a table until next week and we'll talk about it then?
I'll motion table.
We have a table motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a second from Alderman Moyer. Roll call, please.
Alderman Williams.
Aye.
Parker.
Aye.
Wentz.
Aye.
Potter.
Aye.
Moyer.
Aye.
Schoonmaker.
Aye.
Waldron.
Aye.
Berg.
Aye.
8 ayes, no nays.
That motion carries. We'll add it to the committee of the whole agenda next week for discussion and consideration. Thank you very much. Is there any other further business? Alderman Waldron. Oh, Alderman Potter's got one. Oh, thank goodness. What? Alderman Potter.
Yes, in hearing about all of our other communities, I'm taken back to the original presentation that Carol gave us, and she reminded us to be patient. And I'm not too sure we're being patient. No one else is taking the actions that we are. Everyone else seems to be just a little bit less concerned about the implications in the short run. I don't think it's anything that we should be taking lightly, but no one else has closed their libraries, slammed the door in front of their neighbors' needs to get library services, however those may be available, and all the other things that we're doing. And I would hope that as we head towards like 2-on-2 meetings, people would remember that. Let's be patient. Let's get good data. Let's make good decisions.
I agree. We're not being patient. We're being prudent.
Is there any other comments? Can we please close the meeting? Without any further business, the meeting is closed. Thank you so much.